Welcome to another Dolphin Communication Project Deep Dive webinar. Today's discussion will be on the influence of dolphin offspring to a social group. This is a very hot off the presses publication of DCP's, and we have the lead author, DCP's own, Dr. Kathleen Dudzinski, sharing the information with us. To those of you who are listening live, you'll find yourselves muted, so just go ahead and submit your questions to the chat. And for those of you listening to a recording, thank you very much, and feel free to email us or reach out on social media if you have any questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Cal. Let's see if I can actually make it work. Yay, I think I did. I think I got that to work. Hopefully you can see my screen. And I have to thank my two co-authors, Mano Temelin and Heather Hill, who Heather might be joining us a little bit later, but both of them are my partners in all things dolphins. And this research topic in particular had a 2-year gestation from the time that we began collecting the data and analyzing the data from our video archive to when we actually had the paper come out. So very exciting on that front. That's about what it takes. And so I'd like to just share with you what we found. And we also have the paper available on the DCP website. So if anyone wants to read more of the detail, please reach out or grab that from the publications page. Oop, let me go. There we go. So I'm going to move this over a little. Okay. So basically, the toothed whales or the odontocetes that we've studied, including bottlenose dolphins, belugas, killer whales, they all have individuality in their maternal care. And each observed mother that we have documented shows varying degrees of control or contact behavior with her calves. And some of those behaviors, for example, adding discipline to a calf or swimming with a calf in a particular way, various reunions initiated by the mom or interventions by the mom with her calf when the calf might be doing something it shouldn't be doing. When those behaviors are expressed more frequently, that can translate into more protective moms, what humans might call more helicopter moms. You can also have moms who are more permissive, who allow the calves a little bit more leeway, if you will. And having these animals in our care allows us to look at questions over the long term, but also by individuals, looking at individuality between all the females that we've observed and the calves. And a calf is enriching to the adult female in all of the groups that we've studied, and indeed in all of the papers I've read when it looks at mother-calf behaviors, there's certainly an enriching aspect to calves to the moms. Sorry about that. But calves are also enriching to each social group, at least for all of the social groups we've studied. And we were able to look at this in detail with this particular study. And over the more than 30 years of observations and 30-year archive that we have, we often witness everyone wanting to be close to the newest calf. And when I say everyone, I mean dolphins here, but calves are also enriching to the staff, to guests, to the facility, to ecotourists who come to swim and see animals in the wild, and even to folks who might be opposed to having animals in our care, as calves are indicative, they're evidence of good welfare for at least the adult female and the mom in the group, but also often to other group members. And our studies of maternal care have focused on individual interactions, as you can see in some of these photos here on this slide, and specifically the mom with her calf and then the mom-calf pair with the associates in the group. And there's a number of questions that can be asked that involve the mom-calf bond, that mother-calf interaction, that include examining, for example, developmental milestones, investigating how a calf develops its relationships aside from the mom, and more. And all of these questions have in common that they provide information on an animal's and indeed that social group's welfare status. So for this particular study, we had 2 research questions. So does the presence of one or more calves impact a social group? Originally, we wanted to look at this particular question as social groups with calves and without calves completely, but all of our observations from 2016 to the present on the group that we used have one or more calves in the group. So we then decided to look at the social interactions when a calf was in that particular subgroup or not. And so the second question we had was, do the interactions between group members change when one or more calves are present? And so our objectives were, we had three primary objectives. One, to investigate sessions with calves available to the group in comparison to those without calves available. And a session is our underwater video data collection. And we also, our second objective was to document spreading and proximity between the individuals in all dolphin subgroups that were present in the camera's field of view on all of our video records per session. Our third objective was to identify and log general behavioral activity, underwater activity levels, and contacts, actual physical tactile contacts per age, sex, dyad for all groups observed within the camera's field of view per session or per video documentation. So we decided to look at a sample from our archive that had multiple calves in it. And the Roatan Institute for Marine Sciences, or RIMS, as I'll refer to it throughout the presentation, includes coastal sea pens along Bailey's Key, which is on the northwest side of Roatan in Honduras at Anthony's Key Resort. RIMS is located inside of Roatan's fringing reef and includes one large enclosure, which you can see using my cursor. This is the large area enclosure right here. It goes from shore to about 8 meters depth, and the surface area in that area is about 8,000 meters squared, or roughly the size of 3 football fields. And there's several smaller areas for training and research and other medical procedures. Overall, for the years that we included the data, we had 21 bottlenose dolphins, 7 of which were calves aged from about 1 month old to about 3 years in age for our data set. The data were collected following a non-invasive protocol. So all data are collected underwater, observing the dolphins, and we try very hard not to interact with the dolphins. We just want to focus on what they're doing and with each other, not with individuals. And so at RIMS, the data are collected by one individual in the mornings in underwater with the MVA, which is our mobile video acoustic system to record stereo, audio, and video underwater. We follow an all occurrence focal follow underwater protocol. So when one individual or small group comes into view, we follow them till they go out of view and then move on to the next individual. And then from those video, we have analyses using Boris for event sampling for the social groups. And our variables included the IDs in each group, the calves, whether, and we know that the ID of the calves, the number of calves and the individuals that were present versus no calves in the groups, and then the spreading, the proximity, and the behaviors and activity level. And I'll describe those a little bit in the next few slides. So all dolphins within spatial proximity to one another. And when I say within spatial proximity, I mean within an adult dolphin body length using the 10-meter chain rule, that are moving in a similar direction and engaged in similar activities for more than 5 seconds is what we've defined as our social group. And from those social groups, we have proximity, which provides a measure of the spacing between the individuals within that social group. So we have 3 categories for spacing. It's 0 to 50 centimeters or less than 50 centimeters, where the dolphins could easily touch one another without any major movements between individuals. Then you'd have about 50 centimeters to 1.5 meters between individuals. So in order to touch one another or to come into contact, they'd have to move a little closer to each other. And then the category of 2 for our proximity was greater than 1.5 meters between individuals. So they definitely would have to move to get close to one another. When we identified spreading, we had 3 categories. They were tight, medium, and loose. And this was based on proximity between the individuals. And that's looking at the formation of the group based on the pairs in the group and the proximity in total between those pairs within each subgroup. So if proximity is a 0 or a proximity, then the spreading is low, meaning they're tightly grouped. And if the proximity runs from 0 to 2, then we might have a medium kind of spreading between individuals. And then if you have proximity of 1 to 2, where there's much more space between individuals, then that's a high spread group, or a loose proximity between individuals, the spreading. So we coded behaviors based on contacts between individuals, based on pair swim position, object play. And if the majority of the individuals in a particular subgroup were engaged in those activities, then that was what we identified as the activity of the group that we were observing. And these are using individual interactions between two or more animals as we defined. And we had underwater activity levels, which were mutually exclusive across the 5 levels, U1 through U5, from little activity to high energy social actions. And so a 1 was roughly solo individuals or very slow pair swims between individuals, while 5 was the highest that we had. It was characterized by high speed chases, jawing, jaw claps, aerials, animals completely out of the water, a lot of white water. And so you had that range between 1 and 5. And this is linked also to what we might see at the surface based on the behavior of the animals indicating the overall activity level. But these particular activity levels were from underwater. So to give you an example of some of those, this would be a U2, underwater activity level 2. And you have two, starts with 2 individuals. There's some pair swim positions, a little bit of contact, a little bit of orient between individuals. This is Ellie with her calf Gizmo. And this is they're a pair swim, and then you had one individual that might come in and join them. And that's where you might have an activity level when you have a joining of a group change if you have more action between individuals. So we have a U3, and this is, let's see if I can get this to play. There we go. You have some medium and fast swims, again, with Gizmo and Ellie, and then joining by Alita, which is another adult female. There's some rubs. There's the U3 might include some mild chases, maybe some direction changes, a little bit of jawing between individuals, and you can see some tactile contact there between individuals. For 4, as we're getting into more and more activity, you have a lot of vocalizations, much rubbing between individuals, some contact, some chases. You can see some of that there. You can tell from underwater that some of the body parts were above the surface. So that gives you a range between the 2 to 4, and then for the activity levels that we've identified. So shifting to our results, the meat of this study, we included video from 3 separate trips to RIMS spanning 1.5 years. So from November, December 2021 through May, June 2023. And from these 3 sessions, we had 595 minutes of data, which is roughly 10 hours from these 3 sessions. We had a roughly equal amount of video from each of the sessions, and these visits were selected to maximize the sample size of calves across all the 3 pre-weaned ages of the calves. And so for the calves, as you can see in the lower left table right here, we had 1-year-old calves, which were C1, 2-year-old calves, which are C2, and C3 was our 3-year-old calves, because roughly 3 years of age, give or take a year, is when they're weaned from mom, and mom might have the next calf. And so we chose to use those 3 years. And the youngest age, well, we've seen calves within a couple days of birth, but for the animals that we use, the 7 calves that we had, the 3 males and the 4 females, the earliest we saw them was at about a month in age. And these calves ranged in age up to 3 years. And we saw a couple of the calves age across the 3 sample sizes. So Gizmo and Trixie both went from a 1-year-old to a 2-year-old. And then Buzz and Rocky went from 2-year-olds to 3-year-olds as we're looking at the data in these sets. And so these are the 4 mom calf pairs with female calves. Trixie and Gizmo were born in late October 2021. Cami was born in February 2023, and Sandy was born in September 2019. And so the neat thing about using the data from RIMS is we knew their actual birth date, and we could follow them throughout the observation periods to get details on each stage for our data collection sessions. Gracie and Alita are the oldest, most experienced females in the group, and Sandy, Gizmo, Woody, and Cami are the first surviving calves for Tilly, Ellie, Callie, and Polly, respectively. And Tilly, Ellie, and Callie each had a calf at about the age of 7 or 8 that did not survive, but Polly didn't have her first calf until Cammie, and Polly was about 11 years old when Cammie was born. So there's different amounts of experience for each of the moms, but we didn't actually use that in our this particular study. So there are three mom calf pairs with male calves. Woody was born about 2 weeks after Gizmo and Trixie in mid-November 2021, and Rocky and Buzz were both born in late summer 2020. And again, there's different experience for the moms, but that wasn't something that we were looking at in terms of the value of the offspring to the social group. So when calves were present, they were significantly more likely to be observed in groups of 2, 3, and 4 individuals. Specifically, we looked at groups with and without a calf to compare group size, behavioral activity, activity levels, and spreading for each group, as you can see in the numbers here in this graph. We also looked at these three variables for the number of calves present to see if there was a difference in these variables in terms of group size, behavioral activity, activity level, spreading with calf age. So we looked at a variety of different details with and without calf, and then based on calf age in the category of 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and 3-year-old. And also quick side note here, for all of the graphs, the counts on the y-axis are counts, and then the green bars denote groups with calves, while the orange bars represent calves without, or groups without a calf. So groups with no calf, as you can see in this graph, were significantly smaller than groups with a calf. So you have this value right here. We did have some groups of a sample size of 1 that actually had calves. So you do have a few in there, and those were usually the older calves. But mostly the solo groups were individuals, older individuals, just in one solo swimming, doing something on their own. And then you could see the number of calves increased with the number of the group size as well. So the left graph depicts groups with or without calves engaged in 4 different behavioral contexts. And you can see that the bars now that surround affiliative and play groups are calves engaged with more affiliation and more affiliative activity and more play behavior, while groups without calves did more solo and often slow and solo swims. The right graph, excuse me, presents activity levels for groups with and without a calf as well. And the groups without a calf showed low activity or rest, but groups with calves were observed more in social activities with more rubbing contacts, more direction changes, more swift movements. So you can see this is very distinct in both of these examinations of group behavior and activity level with and without calf were statistically significant. So the distance between dolphins was less for groups with a calf, though most groups without a calf were singletons. And groups with the tightest spacing were more often mom-calf pairs, with larger groups showing a bit more distance between the individuals. And the medium and loose groups usually meant more space between mom and calf pairs. So you'd have the tight spacing between a mom and her calf, and then there'd be some distance between other mom-calf pairs in those groups. And again, these values were statistically significant. So we retained groups with no calf as our control for comparisons to groups with calves. And so you'll see in the next batch of graphs to include a bar with no calves in orange, typical, that's always going to be the no calf color, and then the number of calves in varying shades of light green to denote the different numbers of calves, or when we get to it, the ages of calves, the distinct ages. And on the left graph, we have behavioral categories with the number of calves, and the group with 1 calf showed more affiliative actions, while play and agonistic contexts were in somewhat larger groups. And all of these contexts were greater when calves were present. The swim, which is usually low activity to no social activity, was mostly those singletons, the individuals by themselves, which did rarely include a solo calf, which was usually a 2 or 3-year-old. And I'll come back to that point in just a bit. The activity levels that we see with the number of calves is on the right and shows groups with 1 to 3 calves engaged in more social activity than groups with no calves, as you can see by that orange bar with the U1. And the groups with 3 and 4 calves showed even more social activity. So when you had big groups, you'd have more social activity as you'd expect, but it also included more calves when we had those groups. So, as seen in the comparison between groups with and without calves previously, the tightest groups were with 1 calf present, and that was usually a mom calf pair. And this was the space between dolphins that was very small or very tight. And with the groups with the medium or the loose spreading often had multiple calves or multiple mom calf pairs. And so there was a bit more space. Usually there was more playing and more socializing in those groups as well. And as I mentioned, the next batch of graphs will look at calf age as related to those variables. And you can see that the calf age is denoted in the varying green shades, and the no calf is still that orange. And we've tried to include in these graphs a few photos to visually represent the data, because graphs can get a little dry, even though I think they're pretty cool. So if we look at the block of lowest activity, which is no calf present for most of those observations of the slow swims, this also confirms that the 2 and 3-year-olds were observed, who were the ones that were usually observed alone. And you can see that in these 2 areas right here for C2 and C3 in that U1 section of the graph. The next, and maybe those calves are getting a little bit of a reprieve from mom as they mature, or maybe mom needs a little break from the calves. We're not sure, but these are the low level activities when you had just usually one individual present. The next block is the second activity level right here, and that includes some of those contacts, the pair swim positions, some rubbing, and we have all aged calves in these groups. And you can see we have more of the C1s, the 1-year-olds, and then the C2 and the C3-year-olds, and the same for the active socializing with U3 and U4. And we see an influence of age when the calves of different ages are present. And those green bars are higher for all 3 of those ages. And also the same trend holds through in terms of, even though there's a lower sample size for the 4th activity level of roughhousing. And we see that more with the older calves than we do with the younger calves. When we look at affiliative behaviors, affiliative behavior is much less observed when no calf is present. You can see that with the small orange bar right here. But when calves are present, it's all ages involved, especially the youngest calves, the 1-year-olds. But remember that affiliative behavior increases among all individuals when the calves are present. So single dolphins spend a lot of time swimming in low social activity when no calves are present, but other individuals will be by themselves to just swim as well, especially those calves. And for the agonistic and play activities, we saw lower rates for the younger calves. You can see there's barely anything visible here, maybe a count of 1 for the agonistic, and then a couple of bits of play with the younger calves. But older calves did more of this activity, which is somewhat expected. As those calves age, they venture away from mom and play and interact with others in their group a little bit more. It depends on their mom. We have a couple of moms in this group that are very permissive, and we have some moms that very much regulate what their calves do, no matter what age the calf is. So this trend continues with distance between individuals, in that all aged calves have less distance between them and other group members, but as they age, they gain a bit of space. And this likely represents that bit of freedom from mom that we were talking about, especially as the calves begin to develop their other relationships within the group, males with males, females with females, and other individuals. And there's a lot of socializing and play by these individuals as they get older. And this information that we see based on calf age matches with what we've seen for pectoral fin contact exchanges, that young individuals will share pectoral fin contact with their moms over all other individuals. But as the calves get older, they share that pec fin contact with individuals of similar age, males with males, but also more with other individuals in the group. So to give you my conclusions here from this study, and there's much more detail in the paper, the groups with a calf are larger. They show more affiliative and play social contexts, and there's much more higher levels of activity in those groups with a calf than in groups without a calf. The groups with a calf had smaller distances between dolphins that changes as the calves got older. So that less distance between individuals is probably as the calves aged and the distance increased, they're gaining a bit of independence from mom. So there's a relationship between age and some of this that we've documented for activity level and spreading and proximity. And more calves means larger groups with more social behaviors and higher activity levels, at least for this group that we've observed. And it anecdotally is similar when I look at data from our other study sites. There's also an age difference in the activity between younger and older calves that's likely related to maturity and development. And those are questions that can be looked at in a future study. And we also have a study that was just completed by one of DCP's master's students who looked, and I think Savannah might be on this webinar already, and she looked at calves initiating contact with everybody else in the group and found some uh, interesting behaviors that sort of line up with what we're seeing when we look at as they age within a social group as well. So to recap, we found more individuals in subgroups with calves versus not, and more socializing in groups with calves versus not. And let me drop this video down a little bit, have the volume up a little. In this video, it's from January 2024, so outside of our study site, but the larger dolphin here is Ronnie, and he's the adult male of the group, and he's playing with the two youngest female calves at that particular time. So the visibility is not really great on this particular day, but the moms are out of view. And I'll play this again. Ronnie is playing with these two young calves. I would say that he finds them enriching. I think that they both find him enriching, and they're certainly engaged. And again, mom is not anywhere near. So this to me suggests that across the board, calves are welcomed and enjoyed by everyone in the group. Oop, sorry. So, to wrap up, the more animals act like the animals they are, theoretically, the better is their welfare. And maternal care is a natural part of at least an adult female's repertoire that also increases her welfare when she has and cares for offspring. Being able to study maternal care allows us to recognize that these animals have individuality in how maternal care is expressed. And as such, we, as researchers, as caregivers, as facilities, we need to make opportunities for that individuality to be expressed. So I personally believe, strongly believe, that based on our data, that adult female dolphins should be allowed to reproduce, to get pregnant. And as we've shown, the calves are enriching to the entire social group, not just to their moms. And calves will impact the welfare in a positive direction for a social group, not just for that calf's mom or for the adult female. And if we don't, in our management of these animals, if we don't let some species reproduce when they're in our care, then we're going to have to work awfully hard to provide other avenues of positive welfare and to allow them to experience and exhibit natural and normal social behavior. So with that, I thank you for your attention and can end my screen sharing, Cal, and so we can shift to you and then take any questions.
Thank you. Never as quick on the draw as I plan to be. Thank you for all of that excellent information, and people still have time to submit questions to the chat while you're typing those in. Just wanted to point out to anyone who's joining for the first time, if you're looking for the rest of our recordings, you can find those on our website, dolphincommunicationproject.org. Just look under the Knowledge Hub and you'll find all of the recordings there, free to play. You can also watch them directly on YouTube or Vimeo. And usually the top or the second post on that page is the upcoming schedule. The next talk is June 30th. And this was a deep dive. I'm going to go a little out of order on this. This was a deep dive, graphs, numbers, technical things. We're going to get to the Q&A. We also have dolphin lessons that are a little shorter, a little more accessible so that younger or less sciencey individuals can join and enjoy themselves as well. And then we also have our podcast, The Dolphin Pod. So you can get that directly on the DCP website or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, those sorts of places. We should have some new episodes this year.
Hmm.
And then, of course, DCP is a nonprofit, so I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone how you could support our research and education programs. You can become a dolphin protector. That's a fun way to get information, get a certificate. Those are available online. Become a member, buy merchandise. You can actually join Kathleen at Rims in Roatan on an eco tour. The next one is in October. We're also big fans of Stream to See products, so you have a little coupon code there. And then just stay in touch. You don't have to spend any money to support DCP. Take advantage of the resources on our website. Stay in touch by email or social media. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I am going to also invite, putting her on the spot. I don't know, didn't need to tell
I, I
everyone.
was I was going to suggest that to you as well.
Heather Hill is also with us. So for Q&A, if anybody, she can chime in if she wants. Um, we got a couple of questions that all were kind of on the same topic, and then later in the talk you touched on it. So rather than read one question, is there anything else that you want to share about when you're observing a group, there's a group in the camera's view, there's a calf in the group, but the mom isn't present. We got someone asking how often that happens. We got someone asking if mom has space, like to take her calf away from the group, which is kind of the opposite. But is there anything else you wanted to share about the calves being in a social group without their mom, or mom taking her calf away from the social group?
Uh, Certainly, I'll make a couple comments, and then I know Heather has some comments, not just about bottlenose dolphins, but about belugas, and we've been studying killer whales as well to see some of that. And there, it seems, yes, first of all, mom definitely is the one who can take her calf away from a group, and we saw this repeatedly this past in May when we were down in Roatan, especially. Buzz is 6 years old now, six, almost going to be seven. And his mom, Alita, is one that I would define as a helicopter mom. And Buzz is on a short leash. And Buzz can be playing and socializing with Rocky and Tank, and he gets a little too rambunctious, and Alita swoops in and takes him away. And I saw that with Polly taking Cammy away, who she's now a little over 3. And, so we've seen some of that in terms of coming to get your calves. Now, she has a 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old Gizmo who is very clingy to mom. And then her 6-month-old, who is Lightning, he is very precocious, and he is in the mix with the males and with the females and all over the place. And, she'll go get him if he does something, but he's like hanging with everybody else. And then, so we've seen moms regularly take the calves, maybe also sometimes deposit the calves with someone else when they need a break. So we've seen it both ways, and it definitely is individual and distinct. We Over the years, we've seen a couple of the moms. Gracie is one, Tilly is one, who they swim up to you when you're collecting data, and they're like, look what I did. Look, check them out. Do I ever want to swim between a mom and a calf? No, I'm never going to do that. But certainly the moms that show us the calves, it's pretty cool. And then there's moms who are like, I will keep you way over here, and my calf will be with me. And that's it. So, but Heather, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that that's observed in multiple populations, what Kathleen's been describing as far as some moms keeping their calves close or having them having the calves have opportunities to swim with others. We certainly had animals in San Diego at the Navy that like to steal the babies and have a good time with them. And I think that's obviously really important for multiple reasons for the population overall. Killer whales show the same kinds of behaviors as well if there are available animals to hang out with. some moms will be pretty tolerant to having their calves swim with others, but it also depends on the age, I think, and where they are. And obviously belugas are different but interesting. They do many of the same things. So some of the work that we have definitely seen is that the calves, when they're present, they are increasing, as you guys heard in this webinar, just overall activity level and the interactions that they do. And that is true of the other two species that we study. And then I think these are things that we see that have been reported with wild populations as well across multiple populations. So definitely really important to have that opportunity to have young animals around for all involved, not just the mom.
Yeah.
Thank
Very
you.
true.
I'm going to go out of order because I think this is more of a follow-up to that. Not in this paper, but in general, what do you see when the mom has a new calf? The person was commenting on the helicopter mom with the 6-year-old. Like, what will happen when she has a new calf?
Well, for Alita, we'll see. When they have a new calf, usually they move on to that calf, and the older Buzz is no longer he's no longer a calf, he's a juvenile. But she is keeping him close, etc. But then we have, and I think it's individual because we have Ellie who, Giz is supposed to be weaned, but we have several occasions where both, and at the same time, Gizmo and Lightning were nursing, one on one side and one on the other, swimming upside down together. So, which is unusual. That doesn't usually happen.
Right.
But for the most part, the mom has the new calf and that's who she's with, and the other individual is not really attached to mom. We have some
I,
exceptions, but
yeah, and I think to kind of address some of that, we've had some, obviously at RIMS, there's been multiple opportunities to look at the consistency and maternal care across the different calves. And from the PECFIN contact paper that we did do a couple of years ago now,
yeah.
it was pretty consistent. Um, we haven't looked at that question as systematically, I think, with other populations, whether they be bottlenose dolphins or belugas or killer whales. I think that that's an area that we still need to evaluate. I'd say as for the most part, there seems to be consistency with what the moms are doing in terms of how they're caring for their calves, whether they remain protective or allow Shark Bay population that suggests that it's driven by the calf as opposed to the
Right.
mother. So I think there are potentially it's probably an interaction, honestly, right? So
Yeah.
watching Gizmo and Lightning, it's not sex based. It seems to be more individually oriented for the calf versus the mother. So I feel like, and it may also include, what the current social composition is, right?
Mhm.
So how comfortable or confident does a mother feel in a certain social grouping, depending on, number of other calves, age of other calves, number of males around. So, I mean, I think that there are a lot of factors and variables that we just haven't really been able to evaluate quite yet with
Yeah.
all the data.
Yeah,
Future
Thank
directions.
you.
definitely.
And thanks for
It
the
never
opportunity. Sorry
ends.
to jump on late.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Before I read the next question for any listeners, when you hear the word cost in this question, we are not talking about the money that it takes to run a facility like RIMS. So with that in mind, do you think the positive impact on welfare from calves outweighs the costs of pregnancy, childbirth, calf rearing? And how would this cost benefit weight change in the wild without provisioning that the managed care dolphins receive?
Uh,
Ooh, that's a
yeah.
tough question. You want to roll for it,
Well,
Kathleen?
yeah, I'll start on it. First of all, this is not a study that even with our 30 years of information on 20 or 30 years on a couple of different wild groups that we could address in the wild with our data there, in because of the amount of data that we'd need. We don't see the moms and calves in the wild as often as we see the ones in Roatan. So we can pull together a very large sample size of interactions between the individuals from RIMS because we have about an 80% return on our effort collecting data, whereas in the wild it's between 5 and 15% that and we don't there may be females that are pregnant and lose a calf and we don't even know that they were pregnant and they lost the calf. So that kind of cost we don't know because of the amount of times that we can observe them within a set uh, survey period in the wild. And so it's an energetic study, sure, in terms of what's the cost for pregnancy, what's the cost for what they need to get when the animals at RIMS are fed, the pregnant females will be given more food and it'll be monitored so that they're growing a fetus, they're needing more energy. That would be you could potentially study that, but I'm not really sure how you would do that long term in the wild, in terms of assessing how much food they got or what they did. So that would be another way that's hard to do it. But I do believe that the personally, from what I've seen and the reactions when females lose calves, I believe that the benefits to the positive welfare of having offspring definitely outweigh the cost. Uh, they don't have to worry about predators in managed care. They don't have to worry about foraging to find food. It's there. So those costs are not encountered necessarily for what wild animals would encounter. And so you have other ways to affect and impact positive welfare. And I think calves are one of those ways. I hope that answered the question. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the two environments make it very difficult to
Yeah.
make an equal comparison in terms of a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
And I think that, ultimately having offspring, regardless of, what environment we're in, has positive outcomes, whether you lose the calf immediately or lose the calf 3 months later or lose the calf 3 years later. So trying to measure that, I think, would be really challenging, ultimately. And obviously, all questions are worthwhile, but yeah.
And as I see the question came from what I believe is the Sarasota Dolphin Research Project, you guys might actually have data
Mhm.
on calves, mothers and calves, because you have a 50+ year study on that.
Yeah.
For us, we're studying the animals we study in the wild we study them the same way that we study managed care, and that's underwater collecting the data. So we have human habituated groups. But there are other considerations when you have the long-term studies, and those at Sarasota and those at Monkey Maya have the surface observation, long-term tracking of individuals that you can answer a lot of information. It's just a slightly different perspective from how we've collected the data on the animals, both in the wild and managed care. So it offers complementary but somewhat disparate information on the topic.
Cool question, though.
It's
Thank
a way to
you.
collaborate on the topic. Yay, going forward.
Excellent. What do you already have in the works? What your follow-ups to this will be, or not yet? Getting through the other things in the queue first.
Oh, well, there's many other things in the queue. We'll have a couple more papers coming out this year, one on calf initiated contact and then some cognitive work as well. But one of the things we can do is this particular paper focused on the bottlenose dolphins. And so that's something where Heather and I have skirted around the issue of saying, hey, let's add in and compare the belugas and the killer whales. But, we only have a couple of calves, one calf right now for the killer whales and then some of the other. So eventually we'd like to pull that in. It's just a matter of finding that reserve of hours in each day that is hiding from me.
And I can tell you we have a paper that's sort of similar for the belugas, but although we didn't look at the same exact variables, we do have evidence that calves diversify the behavior of the adults depending on social groupings that occurred. So there is some evidence for it already with belugas. Certainly replicating what we did with the dolphins would be great to do with the belugas. Although belugas are a little more challenging because they don't do a lot of group behavior necessarily in our population. So there are lots of paired behaviors and there are group behaviors with young animals, but larger social groups with mother calf pairs don't often happen in the same way that they happen with dolphins. So they do happen, just not as frequently. So anyway, yeah, good question. Future directions.
Excellent. Well, with that, I will thank everyone who was able to join live. Thank you very much to everyone who's listening to the recording. Thank you. Hope you enjoy some more. And of course, to Kathleen for presenting the work. Heather, thank you for joining in at Q&A. And as they mentioned, the beginning, somewhere along the lines, this is an open access paper, so you can get it right from the DCP website. If you have a hard time navigating, finding it, I think it's under the Research Hub is where you can find our publications. Just give us a shout by email or social media, and we will get you that PDF.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.